In this video, I'm going to give you 20 reasons why you might want to rethink your move to Kansas City. Stick around until number 20 because number 20 might reshape the fabric of Kansas City itself. The number one reason is the crime. Now, crime, at least for us in our experience, wasn't necessarily a huge issue. If you don't know, we live in a higher crime area in Kansas City, at least that's according to the statistics, and we've never really been affected by the crime before until this. We just recently had our third child. His name is Theo. He's only 2 months old. We love him very much. He has crazy, awesome hair. But the night that we bought Theo home, there was a drive-by shooting right in front of my house. In fact, when I was changing my second-born son, Augie, I was changing him into a diaper to put him down for the night, and I saw the entire thing unfold. Luckily, nobody was hurt, but later the police did come and collect the casings that were in the street. You know, when it happened, it was so loud and so sudden, I didn't really know exactly what had happened. I thought it was a car backfiring, but the police came and they said, no, definitely somebody was shooting, and they probably discharged like 10 to 20 rounds right in front of our house. I saw them drive by. They were, I told the police the kind of make and model of the car that I saw, and they said, yeah, it was consistent with what was caught on the other doorbell cams. So crime is definitely a big issue if you live here in Kansas City. If you look at US News's most dangerous places in America, Kansas City comes in at number 8, which is really high because this is considering all of the cities in America. Eventually, when you move to Kansas City, especially if you go into the city itself and you don't just hang out in the suburbs for the entirety of the time that you're here, you're going to have to be awake. You're going to have to be aware of your surroundings. Not only that, but the Chiefs just won the last Super Bowl, and the celebration was marred by a horrible event where a woman lost her life at the Super Bowl celebration party, at the parade, after she was shot, and she was killed along with a lot of other people being shot. So a lot of senseless violence happening in Kansas City still. Last year in 2023 was the deadliest year on record in Kansas City. This year is slightly better. We're on a better pace, and there are a lot of measures that the city is trying to do to eradicate crime from the city, but it's just not quite there yet. So Kansas City, if you rank it among all the American cities, is still a fairly dangerous place to live. However, after watching this video, if you still need to move to Kansas City, give us a call. 816-4-MOVE-KC is our number. I promise you, we will get back to you within 24 hours of your inquiry. You can call us, you can email us, you can text us. 816-4-MOVE-KC. I also dropped the email for our team below. Reach out if you're looking to move to Kansas City immediately or in a year from now. I would love to chat with you, and I would love to talk to you about your move to Kansas City, especially if you kind of want to know the tips and tricks to navigate these higher crime areas, the things that you need to know, the sources you need to look up. We have all of those. 816-4-MOVE-KC. Reason number 2 you may want to avoid Kansas City is the crazy, crazy weather. Last 4th of July, like right before the 4th of July, we had this crazy storm blow right through the middle of Kansas City. It actually, there were people on our street where there were 2 kind of fallen trees that were blocking probably 5 to 10 houses from getting out, and they were heavy trees. I went out there right after the storm blew through, and what's crazy about the weather is that it is so unpredictable. The storm blew through. There were probably like 80-mile-per-hour winds. I'm really not exaggerating this. Like, it was really, really high wind speeds, and we could see when we were looking outside, the trees were just completely kind of bending over. The power went out. We had to sleep. We had to get all the kids and sleep downstairs because it was super hot upstairs in our 100-year-old home. We're going to talk a little bit more about that later. But it was really, it was a really crazy storm. A lot of trees on our street came down, and that's pretty common. I would expect that to happen at least once a year. The winters, there's going to be a week where it gets below 0. It's going to be very, very cold. Sometimes 10 below, sometimes even 20 below 0. In the summers, you are going to have a time where it is uber hot and humid. You just can't avoid that here in Kansas City. So if you want to come here, if you want to relocate here, especially if you're from a more kind of calm, tepid climate like California, then you may want to rethink your move to Kansas City because it is going to be uncomfortable for you here. Speaking of the weather, we also have tornadoes. Tornadoes are a main concern for a lot of people who are relocating here to the Midwest, especially people who have never lived here before. They see movies like Twister. They see movies that dramatize tornadoes. And don't get me wrong, tornadoes are a serious thing here. You have tornado sirens being tested the first Wednesday of every month. So if you do move here and you hear those tornado sirens going off, and if you look at it and you look around and you think, hey, there's really not a cloud in the sky, just make sure to check to see if it's the first Wednesday of the month, because that's when they test the tornado sirens. We've had a couple of times where we had, these alerts on our phones telling us to go into the basement because a tornado had touched down within a immediate vicinity of us. Our house, like I said before, is 100 years old, so obviously it has been here since the 1920s. But there are places, especially right outside the Kansas City metro, that are affected by tornadoes a lot more. I recently learned that metro areas can give up enough heat that it kind of dissipates a tornado. Now, I'm not a meteorologist, so again, don't trust me 100% for that. But if you're concerned about tornadoes, then you may want to reconsider moving to Kansas City. Speaking of the weather, speaking of being outside, there's a ton of things to do outside in Kansas City, but Kansas City is not surrounded by a lot of natural beauty. Probably the most beautiful place that you could go that's near Kansas City, if you drive east on the 70 highway, Interstate 70, and you go out past like Topeka and past Lawrence, the Flint Hills are really beautiful. But other than that, there's really not too much around the metro. You can go up to Smithville Lake if you wanted to. It's a large lake in the metro area. However, Smithville Lake, I wouldn't say is like staggeringly beautiful. Again, I'm coming from California. We used to go to the Pacific Ocean like every single week. So that's what we're used to. If you're living on a coast, if you're living near an ocean, there's just nothing really like that. I had some clients relocate here from Colorado, and they said, look, there's absolutely nothing around here that's like the Rocky Mountains. So if you're expecting a lot of natural beauty, if you're coming from a California, if you're coming from a Colorado, if you're even coming from like a Florida where you're really near an ocean, that's just not going to be what's here in Kansas City. You could drive a ways and you could get to different places, but that brings us to our next reason, is that even though in the immediate metro area there's not that much natural beauty, there's also not that much there's also not a ton of natural beauty like in the surrounding areas. So there's not many getaway destinations in and around Kansas City. If you go straight north, you're going to get into Iowa, you're going to get into Nebraska. And to be honest with you, I've done those drives. They're pretty boring. If you like corn, if you like cornfields, if you like agriculture, I mean, it's nice wide open spaces. If you go out west, you can go out towards the Flint Hills. I don't know a ton of resorts or a lot of stuff to do out there, but it is relatively beautiful, but I wouldn't call it like a getaway per se. If you go east, there's really nothing until you get out to Columbia. It's a very straight shot on Interstate 70, and there's really not much to see there. Now, if you go south, you can go to the Lake of the Ozarks, but that's going to be a good maybe 3.5 hour drive away. The Lake of the Ozarks is beautiful. We have been there a couple times in our time living here in Kansas City. But again, if you're coming from the oceans, if you're coming from the mountains, the Lake of the Ozarks really isn't that much to see. I just have to be blunt with you. So there's definitely a lack of getaway destinations. Now, speaking of getting around in and around Kansas City, the infrastructure here is not that great. A lot of intersections every day. Basically, if I'm showing a house in the north side of Kansas City, in the Northland, and I'm driving up, I live kind of in the Midtown area, if you're familiar with that. I drive up to 71, and basically, if you're going from south to north, you have a few places where traffic really bottlenecks. And one of those places is in downtown Kansas City. If you're going on Highway 71 and you're headed north, there's basically one lane that you have to kind of bottleneck into, and you have a lot of people trying to zipper merge into that lane of traffic. You have people who are trying to like hop the line and get in front. It is a mess, especially if you're going around rush hour. To be honest with you, I don't know how they are going to improve that, because improving that, would be probably a few years of construction, widening the freeway, building another ramp over. I don't even know what they would do, and I can't even imagine the headache that it would take while they completely shut down Interstate 71, while they completely shut down Highway 71 while they were doing that construction. I can't believe that. That would be an absolute nightmare. And we'll get to construction a little bit later, because that's another thing that you're going to want to know about moving to Kansas City. Along with the infrastructure, you have really poor water system. They're doing a lot of things to kind of renew that and to refresh that, but my water bill is like sometimes $125 to $150 a month. From what I hear, the old water infrastructure makes it a lot more expensive, and a lot more expensive for you to use water. Not only that, but I have a client who's trying to actively sell a house right now. And when the buyers of the house did their inspections, they did what's called a sewer scope. That's where you send a camera into the sewer of the house. And a lot of the times, you're always crossing your fingers that this doesn't happen, but they found that the sewer line was completely broken. It was broken, and it was still functioning. Water was leaving the house and sewage was leaving the house, but it was broken, and it was about time. It was just a matter of time before it started to back up into the house. That is common here in Kansas City. And the worst part of it was when we called the city, they said there's nothing that they can do until the sewer actually starts backing up. So I'm talking about the infrastructure here is just really not that great. It's unfortunate that it's this way. I know there are some measures being taken to make it better, but right now it's just not great. Speaking of the infrastructure, the number 7 thing is the public services. I'm talking about the trash. I'm talking about the mail. We've lived in Kansas City, Missouri proper for a little bit over 2 years now. Before that, we lived in a different part of the Kansas City metro called Gladstone, Missouri. It's a completely different city that's surrounded by Kansas City. If you don't know exactly where that is, go ahead and click on my map tour video, and I'll show you exactly where Gladstone is. However, we have lived in Kansas City, Missouri proper, and for 2 years, a little bit over 2.5 years, we have not had any trash cans. And if you're coming from a different metropolitan area, you might say, well, what do you mean you didn't have any trash cans? How did you get rid of your trash? And this is what we would do. Every Friday, we would have to take 2 trash bags. They had to weigh less than 40 pounds each, and we would put them out on the curb. If you did that, do you know what would happen? There would be squirrels, raccoons, completely tearing that stuff up. When the trashmen would come, they would take that bag, they would fling it onto the trash truck, and if a raccoon had gotten into it and just torn it apart, guess what they're flinging all over the street? Your trash. We have kids in diapers here, so you have dirty diapers on the street. You have food waste. It's just completely disgusting. I remember one time I came out after the trash was done being picked up, and there were just maggots all over. There were just maggots all over the sidewalk from the trash because the trash man, just flung it. It was open. It just spilled everywhere. Maggots came out. Disgusting. Horrible. We recently, like less than a week ago, got a trash bin where we could put our trash bags inside the trash bin like every other normal American city. So hopefully that makes a big difference in the appearance of the street. But before, we had no trash bins. It was just 2 trash bags. Super annoying, but a reality of living in Kansas City. Another thing that you're going to want to know is, along with the public services like trash, the mail is kind of hit and miss here. I have no clue why this is, but what I sign up for is something that anybody can sign up for if you live in America. It's called Informed Delivery, and it's a service with the USPS. And every morning they will send you an email saying, hey, here's what you can expect coming to your inbox today. Your mailman should be dropping off these pieces of mail, these letters, this spam junk mail, and maybe these packages. I can guarantee you that whatever they say on that informed delivery is going to come 2 to 3 days later. It's infuriating, especially when you order a package that you're excited about, a new trinket or a new toy or whatever you're ordering, and you see, hey, it's supposed to be delivered today. Informed delivery says it's going to be delivered today, and it doesn't come for like 3 to 4 days. You're wondering, did it get stolen? Did they drop it off? And all of a sudden, I wasn't here, and somebody came by and just, porch pirated me. A lot of times, that's not the case. A lot of times, it's just late. I have no clue why it's late. I've never lived in a place where the mail was always consistently late. And if I didn't sign up for informed delivery, I would never know it. But since I do, I've heard it across all of Kansas City, and people who have lived in different parts of Kansas City, Missouri proper, in the north and in the south, they consistently say, no matter where they live, in a nice neighborhood or in a not so nice neighborhood, they say sometimes the mail doesn't come for like 3, 4, 5 days. And then all of a sudden I get this influx of mail and my mailbox is completely full. And that's just a reality of living in Kansas City. When we were in Gladstone, we didn't have that much of an issue with it. I asked one of my clients who just moved to Overland Park, and he said that so far so good. He doesn't have that issue. So maybe it's just a Kansas City, Missouri proper, but the infrastructure I would say here, the infrastructure and public services I say here are not that great. Speaking about infrastructure and public services and getting around Kansas City, you will need a car. That's our next reason why you may want to avoid Kansas City. If you're coming from a place that has incredible, fantastic public transit. I have a client right now, he is relocating here from Oakland, California. And every time he visits, he talks about the BART. I've never been to Oakland, so I don't know about the BART, but he says it's basically an underground rail system that connects all of Oakland. Sounds awesome. We will never have that here in Kansas City. We will never have as great of a public structure, we will never have as great of public transportation as a place like Oakland has, because that sounds incredible. If you can get anywhere in the city underground, and it's not cluttering up like these, it's not like trains just cluttering up everything, that's incredible. We'll never be able to do that. They are extending the Kansas City streetcar. Again, we're going to talk a little bit about that when we talk about construction later. They are expanding the Kansas City streetcar, but that's going to be very limited in terms of the places that it helps you reach for public transportation. I will say the public transportation that we do have is free. If you want to hear more about public transportation, I actually did an interview with a bus driver, a Kansas City bus driver. So if you want to hear more about that, you can click here. But as far as right now, you will need a car. There are no exceptions. If you move to Kansas City, either budget to buy a car or bring your car. Don't plan on leaving them behind. Reason number 9 that you may want to avoid Kansas City is that when you do bring your car, if you bring a really nice car, if you bring your Mercedes or your Lexus or your BMW, make sure it doesn't ride super low, because there are a ton of potholes here. When you drive around in Kansas City, if you don't have enough clearance on your car, I guarantee you will scrape up your fenders or the side skirts of your car, because there are a ton of potholes here in especially Kansas City, Missouri. All over the Kansas City metro, what I've learned about the potholes is that with the extreme heat and the extreme cold that we talked about with the weather, a lot of the asphalt expands and contracts, and over time that creates potholes. Now, going back to the city services and the infrastructure, if the city was a lot better at fixing those potholes, it may not be so bad, but a lot of these potholes, they go unrepaired for quite a long time. So if you're going to come to Kansas City, I've hit a pothole so hard before that my head almost hit like the top of the ceiling of my car. So you're going to want to be very careful when you're navigating the Kansas City roads, because there are a ton of potholes here. On the topic of driving, number 10 reason that you may want to avoid Kansas City is that we have a lot of aggressive drivers here. You would think, coming from a place like Los Angeles, I would be more used to the aggressive drivers here. For some reason, the longer I live here, the more I see that people here drive hyper aggressively. They will completely run you off the road if you are not driving defensively and you're not driving carefully. Maybe I notice it more because the more kids I have, the more I want to keep them safe and be very, very vigilant and aware of how I'm maneuvering my car around the Kansas City roads. But since I've joined the Kansas City Reddit page, I do see a lot of people posting, hey, I almost got in an accident. Hey, check out this dash cam of this person driving erratically. Hey, check out this person who wouldn't let me merge into the merge lane. This is very common here in Kansas City. It could be common in every other metro, but I feel like when I came from California, the drivers who were driving in LA were actually a lot more gracious than the drivers here in Kansas City. That may just be my experience, and maybe I'm always in the wrong place in the wrong time, but I don't necessarily think so. I think that it's beginning to be a reputation kind of thing where Kansas City is known for its aggressive and bad drivers. I think that's also evidence in the fact that when you drive around, you're going to see a couple things. You're going to see a lot of beat up cars. No matter where you go in the city, you're going to see a lot of cars that have just like huge dents. I've seen cars that like the whole front bumper is taken off, the whole back bumper is taken off. I saw a car where I think it got rear-ended so hard that the trunk was like completely flat up against the back seat. So the people sitting in the back seat were basically like at the end of the car because it was so crumpled. I've seen that. You also see a lot of temp tags here. A lot of people drive around and they don't register their cars. So sometimes people drive around with no tags. That's going to be one thing that I think the driving experience overall here, having And especially with my job as a realtor, driving thousands and thousands of miles every year, I've driven all over the Kansas City metro. I would say it's pretty consistently bad. You're going to want to be defensively driving, and you're going to really want to pay attention to the drivers around you because they can be super erratic. Last point about getting around, number 11, I hinted at it before. There's a ton of construction going on here. Right now, the construction that's nearest to my house that's affecting my life the most is the expansion of the KC streetcar. I'm excited for the Kansas City streetcar to expand because then I can drive to the Country Club Plaza and basically ride the streetcar all the way into downtown. That's going to be great, but as far as right now, it's really hard for us to get to the Plaza branch of the library where our kids really like to check out books and go and play. There's a ton of construction right there. It's hard to get to the nearest UPS store when I have to go drop off a package that I'm mailing because of the construction that's happening right there. There's a lot of other places. The closest gas station that we typically try to go to, the Quick Trip up there, there's a ton of construction right near there. So and it's not just a construction that's downtown and midtown. There's construction up north too because they are trying to repair the roads and the potholes. But there's even construction on my street right now. They're redoing all the gas lines. They're digging into the things. They're jackhammering, starting at 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning. It's really kind of annoying, but they're doing what they have to do to make our city a better place. So that's fine, but there's consistently construction almost everywhere in Kansas City. Speaking of construction, the number 12 reason you might want to avoid Kansas City is the old homes here. I'll tell you a quick story. When we first visited Kansas City, we didn't know anything about living here. We were just kind of dreaming and thinking of what our lives would be like here. Yeah, we drove down Southwest Traffic Way, and when we were going down Southwest Traffic Way, my wife was just saying, wow, these houses are just so beautiful. They've got so much charm. They've got so much character. They've got so much presence. They feel like they have a sense of history, and they really do. A lot of these houses, especially in the inner city, are like 100 years old. I think our house was built in 1922, which makes it 102 years old. It's really staggering to think that this house has been here for 102 years. But guess what? When you have old houses, you also have a ton of negative things that you have to fix with old houses. One of the things that a different seller is running into, I already told you about the seller who has the crushed sewer pipe. I have another seller who is dealing with the issue of galvanized piping running up to their upstairs bathroom. And what this means is that their bathroom is slowly losing water pressure because the galvanized piping is rusting from the inside and is becoming more and more choked, and so less and less water can come through. Guess what? There's no way that they can fix that. The only thing that they can do is completely replace the plumbing. That's going to be very common in old 100-year-old houses like this one. Another thing is electrical issues. A lot of these houses that were built in the 1910s, 1920s used a type of wiring called knob and tube wiring. If you do an inspection and you find knob and tube wiring that is active, you just have to know that that is a fire hazard. What it is it is wire wrapped in a cloth sheathing, and when that wire gets too hot and that sheathing degrades too much, it is the cause of a lot of house fires here in Kansas City. I talked to an electrician and he says there's probably 10 to 15 house fires per year in Kansas City caused by knob and tube wiring. That's his admitted estimate. He doesn't know exactly how many, but he says that's one source of a lot of house fires here in Kansas City. Another thing too, living in a 100-year-old home, is we have a stone foundation where they basically stacked stones and mortar and built our foundation. Over time, those start to crack and start to form pathways for mice to get in. We are currently fighting a mouse right now, trying to catch it and eradicate it because we know that it's getting into our pantry. We don't know how it's getting in. We thought we went all the way around and sealed up all the cracks. We've left out mouse traps. We've sealed the food, but we still sometimes find mice droppings. It's super, super frustrating. That's not to say that you can't get mice in a newer home, but it's very common in these older homes because there's so many 100 different ways where a mouse could get in. So we talked about old homes in Missouri. There are a lot of old homes in Kansas, but to mention the Kansas and Missouri divide, if you didn't know, Kansas City is 2 cities and 2 states. 2 cities called Kansas City in 2 states, one in Kansas and one in Missouri. A lot of people think Kansas City is in Kansas, and they're partly right, but most of the Kansas City things that they're thinking about are going to be located in Kansas City, Missouri. Now, with this being one metro area in 2 states, in two states, one thing that you're going to want to know is that there is a little bit of residual bad blood between the Kansas side and the Missouri side. Kansas City, Missouri was the original Kansas City. Kansas City, Kansas was an offshoot of that. There's a huge long history, and if you kind of read it, a lot of people think that there are a lot of racial undertones with Kansas City, Kansas and Kansas City, Missouri. So and I won't get into all of that right now, but the one thing that you need to know is that sometimes you can run into people who have some pretty bad blood towards the other state. I was showing a house in Olathe. Olathe is a suburb in Johnson County, Kansas. Johnson County is one of the nicer counties in all of the Kansas City metro area. When I was showing that house, I got into a conversation with the homeowner, and they asked me where I live, and I said, I live in Kansas City, Missouri. And they immediately were really cold to me. It was like one of the weirdest things that I've experienced where, you know, me choosing to live in Missouri, like 15 miles away, literally 15 miles away from where their house was located. They said, you know, somehow I was like more beneath them. They said Missouri is like the worst part of Kansas City. Missouri is a horrible state, and they went on and on and on, and they were really like legitimately upset about it. I don't think that's the norm. I think that's changing, especially with a lot of younger generation people moving in here. But sometimes people will still have bad blood. In fact, go to any one of my YouTube videos, and once in a while, you will find people saying, hey, Kansas is the worst part of Kansas City. Hey, the Missouri side is the worst part of Kansas City. I think that there are really awesome pros and cons to living either on both the Missouri side or the Kansas side. The Kansas side has Johnson County, some of the best schools, some of the best suburbs for families. The Missouri side has all the fun things to do. And the Missouri side also has a lot of great schools and great suburbs and great areas. We're going to talk about schools in a little bit, but I think there are pros and cons to living on both sides. I don't necessarily have an affinity for one or the other. In fact, I own property in both. I own a rental property in Kansas that's doing fantastic for me. I own a rental property in Missouri, and I live in Missouri. I don't think there's any reason to continue this feud, but there are a lot of people who are of a different generation. So if you don't want to join in on this feud, if you don't want to join in on the bad blood between Kansas and Missouri, then maybe reconsider moving to Kansas City. Also with this feud, it's going to be exacerbated. Remember, stick around until number 20, and I'll tell you a bombshell of a development that really could shake up the Kansas City metro. Speaking of Kansas and Missouri, no matter where you go, either Kansas or Missouri, I feel like the Kansas City metro has a lack of food diversity. Now, if you're a diehard Kansas City barbecue lover, listen and hear me out. There is a ton of good barbecue here, probably the best that I've ever had in my life. And maybe this is my biases because I'm not a huge like barbecue fanatic. I don't think about barbecue all the time. I do run into some people who think barbecue is the best dish they could possibly have, and to them, great. I like seafood. I really like lobster. I really like crab. I really like fish. I really like a good steak. And there are some of those things here in Kansas City, but you don't have that much food diversity. Coming from a place, again, like Los Angeles, California, that has every food under the sun. They have every food under the sun, and it's super available to them too. You don't have to go super far to get a good Thai restaurant, to get a good Indian restaurant. Now, the more and more I live here, and the more I serve clients who are from different ethnicities and different backgrounds, I recently had a client invite me to some Ethiopian food, and it was incredible. It was some small Ethiopian cuisine down in Lenexa, and my wife and I absolutely loved it. My kids actually scarfed it up too. I was super surprised. They had this really awesome veggie plate, that I don't normally like vegetables as much as I like meat, but I devoured that. It was so good. But it's not like California. We were still driving a good 35 minutes to get to the Lenexa to eat that Ethiopian food, where I feel like in California, you have a lot more things at your fingertips. A lot of people that I help, a couple people who I've helped move here from New York, they say the same thing. It's like you can find the food diversity here, but you will have to drive for it. I recently hosted a family who was moving here from Oklahoma, and they wanted to know where the best Kansas City tacos were. Again, you have to drive to Kansas City, Kansas to get the authentic Mexican street tacos out there. And depending on where you are in the metro, it could take you 30, 45 minutes to get out there. So while there are different foods that you can eat, I feel like there's just a lack of food diversity, at least in a kind of per capita geographic range. You just have to really drive to find those areas. Speaking of food diversity, this next one is a lack of nightlife. Now, this is all hearsay, so if you read something different or if you experience something different here in Kansas City, go ahead and drop something into the comments because I always want to brush up on my research. And you also have to take this. I am a 35-year-old father of 3. My kids are 4, 3, and 2 months. I don't go out at all. My wife and I have the occasional date night where we go out to eat, but we're home by 8 and we're tucking in the kids by 8:30. So again, this is based on what other people have said, what younger people have said, but they say there is a lack of nightlife here. There is a lack of places where you can go to bars, to clubs, if that's your jam. One thing I will say that is true, the coffee shops around here close extraordinarily early. Coming from Los Angeles where the coffee shops close at like 11:30 p.m., like at earliest, and some go way into the night, like 1 or 2 o'clock. You're not going to find a lot of coffee shops that open past like 6 p.m., which I think is a really weird time for a coffee shop to close, by the way. I don't know why you would close a coffee shop at like 4:30 p.m. or like 5 p.m., but you know, that's just their decision. I guess they don't think people are coming at like 7 or 8. Sometimes I would like a place that is open a little bit later so I can get away from the kids and do a lot of the work that I need to do, but that's just not here in Kansas City. Speaking of nightlife, we are known as one of the worst cities in America for single people. I don't know how they came up with this metric or statistic, but the next reason is that if you're a single person moving here to Kansas City, apparently according to the statistics, you can expect to be unlucky in love. Whether you're swiping, whether you're going on the apps, trying to swipe right on people and making matches, I've just heard that dating here is really bad. Personally, I don't know if that's necessarily the experience of my friends and the clientele that have moved here. I've been to 2 to 3 different weddings that are here, but I will tell you the next wedding that we are going to in December, my good friend who is marrying a girl later in December, she's not from here. She's from a completely different part of the United States. And he said, hey, I couldn't really find anybody here in Kansas City. So while I have been to some weddings, I have also heard some anecdotal experiences where dating is maybe a little bit hard here. Again, when I moved here, I was already married for a couple of years, never really hopped on the dating apps. Don't know firsthand experience if it's true, but there are a lot of, there have been articles in the past saying that Kansas City is not a good place to date. Here's one that I really didn't start to experience until this year living in Kansas City. I think one of the big negatives in living in Kansas City is the bugs. If you get eaten alive by mosquitoes, I know mosquitoes are all over the United States, okay? They're a plague, nobody likes them. I just feel like there's so much worse here than when I lived in California. Not only mosquitoes, but you have really nasty critters like ticks. One time I was showering, I went to shower, I reached under my arm to soap my armpit, and I felt a little bump. And you know what it was? It was a tick that had attached onto me. It was disgusting. Pulled the thing out, squished it, threw it down the drain. But they can carry Lyme disease, they can make you really sick. Fleas are another thing. We have to really keep up on our dog's flea ointment or he's going to get some fleas. Another thing that we didn't have moving here from the West Coast and from my clients who have moved here from the East Coast, they've never heard of these things either. There's a small, kind of microscopic bug called a chigger. And those bugs can really get you itching just as much as a mosquito bite. And I don't know if bug spray does anything to them because we do try to religiously put on bug spray, but we still get chigger bites. And we get them in like weird places like the waistband of our pants. And they crawl up there. It's really gross. It's really disgusting. You get these red welts everywhere and you're just itching them like crazy. We've bought like ointments and creams and sprays just to try to keep them all away. But nothing really seems to work because it's moist here. It rains. When it rains, these little crevices in your lawn collect water, and then mosquitoes go and lay their eggs there. It's disgusting, and then they hatch and they bite you halfway to death. So bugs are disgusting here. Big spiders here. Don't know where you're from, but at least compared to where we relocated from, the spiders are a lot bigger here. And in our basement right now, I just sprayed our basement, but I found like these really disgusting like demon cricket looking things. I don't know exactly what they are, but especially in like 100-year-old basements like this one, you will definitely find those things. I see them consistently when I'm showing houses all over Kansas City. So bugs are not the bug scene here is not great. Moving on, maybe you don't care about dating, maybe you don't care about bugs, maybe you're a young family coming here and you're hoping to put your kids in public schools. I would say you need to read the reviews of the public schools, especially the Kansas City, Missouri public schools. It's a source of controversy, so I'm not saying that you should avoid Kansas City, Missouri proper because of their public schools, but historically, the public schools in Jackson County have just gone through a tough time of like losing their accreditation, regaining it. losing it again. Right now they currently have it, but a lot of people say it's only a matter of time until they lose it. So you're just going to want to vet the public schools. You have some really great public schools, and you have some public school systems that are just not that great. Whether they're not getting the funding, whether they're not getting the support. I don't really know the issues of why it's so bad, but I do remember when we were considering putting our kids in public school, we looked it up, and one of the stats was like the literacy rate of the students has gone up from like 11% to 16%. That's really unfortunate. No parent that has a child wants to know that. So if you're going to live in Kansas City, Missouri proper, especially south of the river in Jackson County, and you want to put your kids in public school, you just want to do your research. You want to make sure that you're a very involved parent. I'm not saying that kids can't succeed if you do that, but it's just one thing that you're going to want to know. Speaking of different areas in the metro, one thing that I didn't notice before, that I had a client who moved here from Georgia, told me this. He said the racial segregation here is really intense. So that's our number 19 reason, is that the Kansas City is unfortunately really racially segregated. There are pockets of Kansas City where it's like highly African American. There are pockets of Kansas City where it's highly Caucasian. There are even pockets of Kansas City where it's like mostly Hispanic, and pockets of Kansas City, mostly down in Overland Park, where it's predominantly Asian. There's not that much mingling among the races here, at least according to this particular person. I'm always hesitant to bring this up on the channel because as a realtor, I cannot ever direct you to a certain area because of a race or religion or anything like that. So I really want to stay clear of anything that could get me in hot water with the fair housing violation. But all this to say that there are pockets of Kansas City where you're going to find predominantly one race, and a lot of people notice that when they first move here. So if you want this kind of big, giant melting pot, not to say that you can't find it in either a particular neighborhood or just, going into a different neighborhood and making friends with the people there, that's very possible. People are friendly, but that's just something that my clients have told me that they notice when they relocate here to Kansas City. So you stuck around to the end, and I promised you that I would tell you a reason that you should avoid Kansas City, that if this goes through, it could really shake up the fabric of the metro. We talked a little bit about the divide between Kansas and Missouri, but if you don't know, there's current legislation going on right now that is proposing to move our sports teams, to move the Kansas City Chiefs and the Kansas City Royals, who currently play right now in Kansas City, Missouri, on the Missouri side. In their stadium is near Independence, is on the east side of Kansas City, but there was recently a vote about funding the stadium, renovating the stadium, that went to the voters of Jackson County, and we voted it down. People voted no, that they didn't want to pay more taxes to support these teams, and so now there's legislation to move the Chiefs and the Royals over the state line to Kansas, which I guarantee you, if that happens, people are going to go crazy. People are really going to be upset, especially us who live in Missouri are going to be crazy upset at the teams moving over to the Kansas side.